I really like to explore what we can do on the iPad before we have to use SSH apps to do most development work. I found a pretty neat concept where you can deploy front-end and back-end code on your iPad and view it on the iPad or any other device on the network. It's not exactly full stack in the sense that there isn't any database to work with, but I can probably go over some use cases with that in another video. First, this is what we're going to make. A single web page that shows a picture of a cat, some text, and today's date, all running on the iPad. Let's get started. I'm going to create a new folder in this project and then create our Flask app that will render our front end. Let's start with a basic Flask framework. We'll use the same template as in the last video. I'll first import Flask and render template, then I'll create a class that will hold our static methods. Let's call it serve.html. I'll just have two functions, one for the root endpoint, which will render our index.html, and one for any pages not found. Just a little side note here, if anyone happens to hit a random endpoint that you didn't code for, they'll just get a 404 with an error telling them that the route was not found. Finally, I'll have a run function which will run on port 8080. I'm designating the host as 0.0.0.0 because I want other devices on my network, such as my laptop or iPhone, to view the web page while it's deployed. From there, we'll set up our entry point, which is basically to instantiate the class and then call the run function. I'm adding some parameters for debug and port because I may want to change these in the future, who knows. I try not to hard code these kinds of things. Before I run the code, I actually have to have an index.html, so let's write something super quick. You can use the default one from Pythonista, or you can use any generic index.html that you find on the web. Anything would do, really. I'm going to use the default template, and all I'm going to do is change the title and add cats to the header. Let's run our Flask application, go on our browser, and refresh the page. Boom! Hello cats. At this point, you're like, okay, cool, now what can I do? Let's stop the Python application, and now I'll set up the JavaScript. Back at the index.html, in the head, I'll set it up so that I should read an index.js underneath the static /js directory. I want the JavaScript to actually print out a date and change the DOM, so underneath the header, I'll add an ID for the date. Let's create two new folders, static and then JS underneath static. And inside the JS folder, I'll create an index.js. Yes, I know I tapped HTML, I slipped, but it doesn't matter in this context since all that does is create a template. I'll just have one line in there and that'll just get the date ID for my HTML and stringify today's date. Let's go back to our Python application, rerun, and then check out our website. Static HTML with some dynamic text JavaScript. Today's date. Yay! Lastly, I'm going to want to have a styles.css to change the look and feel of the website, and this is where we get to have some fun with cats. In index.html, I'm going to remove the default styles block and add in a link to a local styles.css file from our current working directory. I'll add a paragraph tag here and then a section for images. I'm using the publicly available API cat as a service, which will give me a random cat image, and I can even supply some text to have it appear on the image. Let's go back a few folders and tap on our main Flask Python code. Rerunning the app, it looks really barren, so let's stylize it on the iPad. Just like for the JavaScript section, I'm going to create a CSS folder instead of static, and then I'll create a styles.css file underneath the CSS folder. And then create 3 CSS blocks. For the body, I want the text to be in the center with a dark-ish gray background color. You can choose any background color you want. Do whatever that makes sense to you. It's really your creativity, your imagination. For each div, I want to pad it 25 pixels at the top, and I want to center the images with 25 pixels on both sides. Let's rerun the Flask application, open up Safari, and now we have a beautiful cat hosted on our iPad. Congrats! You can now create a backend and front-end application all on the iPad without any internet connection or fancy Linux boxes at home or in the cloud. We can even use this iPad's IP address and access the website that way. Here I'm using my IP rather than localhost. If you get this far, try to access the IP and port on your iPhone or your laptop while the app is running. Here's a recording of my Windows host accessing the same web page that we're running on the iPad. This guide isn't really meant to show you the best way to do front-end and back-end development solely on the iPad, nor should it tell you to run out and buy a copy of Pythonista. But if you're ever bored at home and you don't want to host a server in the cloud or boot up a Raspberry Pi to SSH into, and you want to do some vanilla coding, give this a try. You might run into some cool things that you might not have thought of.